Okay, well, my name is Ted McDonald. I was a colleague of Jim's here in this department until '79 for a 10-year period, along with Ian Fleming, Ian Patterson, and Andy, of course, who spoke earlier. And what I'm going to do this afternoon is just to say a little bit of early background about Jim, and then tell you a couple of anecdotes from the period when we were here in Cambridge together. So starting off with the early period, and thanks very much to members of the family, and especially to Jim's sister for giving me some of the detail here. Jim was born in 1935 into a Liverpool that was really very depressed. It was the period of the Depression, and it was a very sort of rundown city. And he then was evacuated during the war, and initially into Yorkshire, to a farm in Yorkshire, and then back to Liverpool for a period, probably at the time when the bombs were raining down on the city, especially in 1941, when he would have been 6 years old, and then off to North Wales again, to another farm. And his father stayed in Liverpool, and therefore Jim was the eldest son of his sister, and therefore he was sort of responsible in that farm, and he learned to be independent, and he learned lots of practical things too. So anyway, by 1964, moving on a little bit, I started my PhD working with Alan Battersby, Professor Alan Battersby at Liverpool, and the same day, Jim started his first PhD student, Mike Winrow, who sends his greetings from Cincinnati, where he lives now. And Mike and I became really great friends. And Jim had his first PhD student, and he used to take him and one or two of his friends down to the Philharmonic in Liverpool once a week or so. And I don't mean the Philharmonic Hall, which is famous for its wonderful classical music, but I mean the Philharmonic Hotel, which is a pub, and it's where they would have their lunch on a Friday lunchtime. And this was a little bit special at that time, because to be honest with you, during the 1950s and the early 60s, in universities, there was a hierarchy, and it was really quite formal. And so it wasn't normal for supervisors to take their students out and socialize with them in the way that Jim did. And it was one of those first examples of him showing that sort of warmth and mentorship that he went, which many of you others have mentioned today. So Jim had, by now, had a year in America. He was now married to Ruth, and soon after that, he joined Professor Battersby to go to Cambridge here. I actually joined at the same time. And down here, he eventually bought a house that was a little bit run down. And Jim already mentioned, Andy Holmes mentioned already Jim's do-it-yourself capabilities. Well, first anecdote, Jim installed his own central heating system. And he did all the copper, all the bending, all the fitting, all the joints, the welding, and so on. But he also did something very special, which I just so admired, and I've never heard of it being done since. And what it is that Jim was aware that one of the problems with central heating systems is corrosion. In your water that's circulating around the system constantly, there builds up oxidation products, particularly rust and black rust iron. You have to filter off every so often. Jim borrowed a nitrogen cylinder from the lab here. He took it home, not very far, and he degassed all of the water that went into the central heating system. And then topped it up with nitrogen on top of that, of course, and this minimized corrosion for I don't know how many years, but I'm sure it was a successful piece of work. So that's the first one. And the second one was that in the first few years we were both here and getting to know Cambridge and starting to go out on the river. And already you've seen at least 3 slides with Jim punting or holding a punt pole or something like that already today. And my next anecdote is really about punting. So one Sunday morning, Jim said, I can get a punt from St. John's and it'll be unlimited time, so we don't have to worry about the clock. And what we'll do is we'll book a table at the Red Lion at Grantchester, and we'll take a bottle of wine, because they don't do wine. We'll pay corkage for them to supply glasses for us to drink the wine. We take a bottle of wine, and we'll punt down to Grantchester, which is actually quite a long way. It's not just going along the backs and back, it's quite a long way down there. So off we went about 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was a lovely day, and everything went extremely well, until we got very, very, very near to the pub. We could actually see it just across the next field. And then there was a small collision with another punt while I was doing the punting. Okay, and I held onto the pole, but the boat went the other way, and I landed in the water. And, you know, what could have been a disaster was saved because Ruth had foreseen what might happen, and she had a change of clothing for Jim. So I wore Jim's underpants and his socks and his shirt, and we went in to have our lunch at the Red Lion, and all ended beautifully well. So I think what I wanted to finish on was to bridge to the next, to introduce the next speakers, and that is to say that in that early time in Liverpool, I think it was hard times. I think Jim realised how privileged he was to have risen from that, to become a university lecturer at Liverpool, and then to come here to Cambridge, to become a fellow of St. John's College, to have the privilege to be able to take a punt down to Grantchester and all the rest of it that comes with it. But he never forgot his early beginnings, and he wanted to pay back as much as he could. And I think that over the years, he wanted everybody who came through his life to have opportunities that he had had. And he wanted to give you, those of you who worked with him, he wanted to give you opportunities. And it's notable, I think, one thing I'd like to particularly say about myself is that when I did my first degree at Imperial College, starting in 1961, there were 65 of us doing chemistry. 2 women. 2 women out of 65. And look at the representation of women in the groups that Jim mentored and taught over the subsequent years. He's done far more than his fair share of levelling up, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And with that, I would like to introduce the next speaker, who is Rebecca Goss. Rebecca